Welcome to all of you. My name is Mary Beth Corrigan. I'm the librarian for collections on slavery, memory, and reconciliation at the Booth Family Center for Special Collections. And my role is to make accessible the documents that are related to slavery. And I just realized I didn't share my screen. Anyway, everything's fine. You can see the screen? Okay. Basically, my role is to assess the collections that we have especially in special collections, but also in our electronic records, and try to identify how they relate to the history of slavery and racism and contribute to the goal of Georgetown becoming an academic center in the study of slavery and race. I also support classroom instruction, and I work with community groups who are interested in the history of slavery and racism at Georgetown and some of its associated communities. The, um, the objectives of this workshop are really to help introduce researchers to the sources that are available at Georgetown that can help them discover the names of enslaved people, specifically their ancestors, if they're members of the GU 272. We'll talk a bit about the records that were created during the slavery era and the late 19th century that can be useful to this goal, and also to identify the best access points for the discovery of the names of enslaved and free Black individuals. And when I say access points, that's kind of library speak for the types of information that you need to be able to search our records and to make things discoverable. I'll also explain how to use the house records within the Maryland Province Archives for you. The collections that are related to slavery, the backbone of it is in our manuscript and archives collections. The Jesuit collections include the archives of the Maryland Province of the Society of Jesus. And when I talk about house records, what I'm really referring to are records of the individual communities established by the Jesuits. The Jesuits essentially established houses, places where they could all live. And from there, they did their missionary work, whether that was for informal missions to churches, to schools, to individual plantations. That the houses are where they were the kind of the nodes of that work. There's also plantation financial records in the archives of the Maryland Province of the Society of Jesus. The Woodstock College Archives really contains a lot of good materials that are post-slavery era. The priests of Woodstock College worked with St. Alphonsus Rodriguez, and there was within that parish, there was a very, very active group of Black Catholics that formed societies named for St. Peter Claver. Finally, the Georgetown University Archives contains the records related to Georgetown College. The Philademic Society really contains information on the way the students viewed slavery. I just want to give you a sense of what I refer to in the archival resources. I'm going to be going back to this portal several times, but in most cases, I'm going to be using shortcuts to get directly to the folders that I want, but I want you to get a sense of orientation. You can go to this portal and really search on any number of terms and go through it and get discrete entries from a variety of different collections. But you also can go ahead and identify discrete collections like this, the Maryland Province Archives. And you can see I search it 1,000 times. It's always going to be number 101. And the Archives of the Maryland Province of Society of Jesus comes right up, and you click there. And what I want to show you here is this is what every collection page is going to look like. It gives you a scope of content notes. We always have notes about materials related to slavery if it's part of the records that you're looking at, and previous citations, conditions governing, reproduction rights, things like that. Also to here, you'll see there's this bar. First of all, you can search through the entire collection and limit things by year this way, but you also can, and this is why I'm showing this to you now, is we've established series. About 3/4 of the Maryland Province Archives falls into what are the records of the provincial, the records of the procurator, and the records of the houses. So these records are organized by function of the Jesuits. The provincial sets up membership rules and determines what rules are okay for the communities. establishes missions. Procurator is a Latin term for treasurer, so he's responsible for the monies that come in from tuition, but also for our purposes, the plantations. And then finally, records of the houses are where the pastoral activities and the activities of these Jesuit communities, the records of those are located. I'm going to get back to this idea later in the presentation, but I want to lay that out to you at the very beginning because I do refer to the terms from that page quite often through this presentation. Um, and all of us know that the records that we have are the legacy of a long history that the Jesuits have in Maryland. The Jesuits arrived in Maryland in 1632, shortly after the colony was established by Lord Calvert for England. And the Jesuits established missions, and primarily to serve the wealthy Catholic colonizers who were settling in Maryland, but also to evangelize among indigenous people. From the very beginning, they envisioned using supporting their missions by engaging in an imperial trade. And in the beginning, I think the vision was actually fur trading. That's what in the early colony, that's what people were engaged in. But given the accumulation of land that the Jesuits had and other and other colonizers were having, they began to establish plantations and participate in tobacco production, which was dependent upon racial slavery. And the Jesuits were part of the establishment of this system. And we know for certain that they were engaging in the slave trade and owned slaves by the late 17th century. And at that point, the scope of who the Jesuits were evangelizing among expanded, at least culturally, in that they began to evangelize among the people who were enslaved by the Catholic colonizers. And this was especially true of the people they owned. And finally, in many ways, the founding of Georgetown College is the legacy of these colonies. And, they certainly benefited from this economic system that was established, but also to the social milieu and the relations of slavery is something that was part of the culture of Georgetown from the very beginning. And I'm going to just show you a map of the mission of Maryland, so you can get a sense of how it grew within Maryland. You can see in what's now Prince George's County, Charles County, and St. Mary's County, kind of a density in the missions. And those were established in the early colonial period. By 1763, the Jesuits moved into central Maryland and founded a mission in Frederick. And that became an extremely important endeavor because by the 1830s, the Jesuits had established a novitiate there. And they also established in this late 1690s Woodstock College. And all of these records are part of the Maryland Province Archives, and it's really part of the geographic scope of what we have. And so all that's important to consider as you're thinking about the full scope of what you can learn. Okay, I'm going to talk a lot about the Georgetown Slavery Archive because I think the Georgetown Slavery Archive is a great place to start because it can help with searches into the financial records of the Southern Maryland plantations as well as Georgetown College. I'm then going to talk a little bit about how you can use that research into the Georgetown Slavery Archive to build into looking at the finding aids that I just showed you that are available through the portal, the Georgetown Archival Resources site. The reason that I suggest that, especially for people who are starting out, and I'm approaching this as if you're starting out, essentially, I would begin by using the Georgetown Slavery Archive. The reason is that the lists of people in the accounting records are generally more systematic than they are in a lot of the house records which include the sacramental registers. It usually, because of the way enslavers drew up their records, They generally created lists of names and often identified them by approximate age. And they often organized these records by identifying family members, close family members with it. You can get connections to place. Usually, records are recorded by the plantation that a person was in. And certainly you can get the names of enslavers. Most of the records that the Jesuits created of their plantations do not include the surnames of the individuals, of the enslaved individuals, but most of the legal records, including bills of sale, mortgage documents, and ship passenger lists, include surnames. And for the 1838 sale, there's a lot of documentation that includes surnames, so it's possible for people to make connections. Just to show you, this is probably one of the most frequently cited of the documents that we have, and it's a list of 272 people. This is the list that was created by basically the plantation managers as they were considering the sale in 1838. You can see here that people are listed by their name and their age. They're listed, it's organized by plantation, so people are identified by which plantation they were living in at the time of the sale, whether it was White Marsh, St. Thomas Manor, Newtown, or St. Inigo's. The the other feature of this too is that this list shows, what happened to some of the people. In some cases, there are notes saying that somebody was married off, which essentially means that somebody was sold to somebody in Maryland to keep a married couple, to keep married individuals together, to keep them united. So there's a lot of information you can draw from this document if you're interested in tracing your family. But this is a really important seminal document. Um, so the Georgetown Slavery Archive, though, is essentially it's a curated set of documents. It originated in 2016. Professor Adam Rothman began to select documents from the records that he and the students that he was working with were surveying. Initially, they were working on the working group report, so they were prioritizing documents related to the 1838 sale and slavery at Georgetown College. But as he and his associate editor Elsa Barraza Mendoza continued their work, they began to look at documents related to slavery at some of the Jesuit plantations. The records, the other feature of this that's really important is that the records were drawn from the Booth Family Center for Special Collections and also some external repositories. This includes the Maryland State Archives, the National Archives, and archives in New Orleans as well. The selected documents were digitized and presented with descriptions and transcripts to make them more accessible. The scope of the materials they surveyed, and they did really an especially good job of looking through financial records. Daybooks recorded in chronological order the transactions that were made by the Jesuits, whether it was with selling goods and services, but also people. Account books, inventories, legal records, and some of these were identified through external repositories, bills of sale, deeds and contracts, mortgage agreements, correspondence that they went through mostly through the Maryland Province Archives, reports by the Jesuits on the enslaved community, federal and state records, which included the ship passenger lists and tax assessment reports. And finally, they excerpted from the sacramental and house records. They did not transcribe those fully, which is why researchers are going to have to use some of the materials that are on the archival site for that. But just to give you an idea of what the Georgetown Slavery Archive looks like, essentially they have items here that are quote featured items. This item that's featured is really a ship manifest. One of the benefactors of the Jesuits managed essentially was the agent for a group of people that were transported from West Africa to Annapolis. And finally, so you can get an idea of some of the highlights. But right here, there are tabs for individual items, the gallery, multimedia, map, descendants. And these are usually things that were contributed by the descendants. Further reading is a bibliography of things to read. I'm going to talk a little bit about the collections and these search bars in just a second. But that's basically what the Georgetown Slavery Archive looks like. And you can get it on your phone. Looks like this on your phone. Um, as the editors began doing their work, they realized that it was best to form collections of documents to make certain types of documents easier to search through and browse through. So they created 6 separate collections. And essentially, this is what that looks like. The collections are Memory and Reconciliation, which really refers to Georgetown and what Georgetown's doing for slavery, memory, and reconciliation. Uh, some of the stories by descendants, many of them contributed by descendants to the GSA. This is a very important one. That essentially there's documents related to Louisiana. Many of them were surveyed in repositories in Louisiana. Slavery at Georgetown College, which refers specifically to the things that were gained from going through the records of Georgetown College. Slavery in the Maryland province refers to things that were from the Jesuit plantations. And here's something from the 1838 sale, which you can see here. There's 59 documents in total. And you can take a look at this and you can see that you can search through these in a very more detailed fashion. You can browse by tag. If you take a look, the tags come up and you can just go through and search what topic you want. So that's something that's available to all of you. Finally, the Georgetown Slavery Archive, I'm getting to the individual items now, that they use a descriptive standard that is common for digital collections. They essentially include the title, a short description of the document. They elaborate on some subjects and provide dates. They also provide full source information, and when available, there's links to the source, a transcription of the document so that you don't have to go through and deal with the 19th century handwriting, which is very idiosyncratic and can be very difficult especially for beginning researchers to read. And the translation of the document if it's not written in English, and also the digital image. So you can see this is the bill of sale, which is a legal document. And this essentially lists the people that were included in the sale, and it was written between Thomas Milady and one of the people who purchased them from Henry Johnson from Louisiana. It's dated November 10th, and you can see here it's a very short title, gives you the subject, the sources, and the description itself is very, very short. Transfers 56 named persons from Thomas Milady to Henry Johnson for the total. That's the total amount. One of the things about the sale is that there's not you cannot find the appraisal for individual people. It's just in total. But the way it was calculated was by looking at the age and sex of the person, because we have discrete documents where they're talking about returning money because somebody didn't show up, and they're referring to the person's age and sex to determine the value. And here you can see the transcript of the document. And right here, you can click on here, and actually you would have to download it, but I'm not going to do that. But you can essentially see what the document looks like. But the thing I wanted to show you is if you can go here, you can take a look here, and you can go directly to the description of the document that's within Booth and that's been digitized by Booth. And you can go here to Digital Georgetown to find the document. And I'm going to go through that again, just so you don't miss that. And the other thing too, I wanted to be able to show you is what it would look like if it's from an external repository. So one document that comes from an external repository is the manifest of the Catherine Jackson. Should come right up. And you can see here the manifest of the Katherine Jackson, the description of it. And here, in this case, it's described as a list of the slaves transported from Alexandria to New Orleans on the Katherine Jackson in November and December 1838. And many of the men, women, and children on this manifested were sold by Thomas Malady to Jesse Beatty and Henry Johnson. And it explains who they were shipped by. Right here, it shows that it's from the National Archives, and it gives us the source, the citation from the National Archives. But if you notice, there's no direct link to that because there's no discrete link to that on the National Archives site. But it gives you a full transcription, and it also provides, in some cases, essentially surnames of people and people are listed by their family grouping and with age, very standard type of thing. And you could scroll down and you can get a copy, you can see what the digitized copy looks like. And essentially it's very convenient. You can download them. That's the easiest way to view it. I'm not going to do it now because it's going to take a minute, and in fact, I have no idea if it's going to take a minute or a few minutes because of the way the Wi-Fi is acting. You could see here they've created subjects: slavery, slave trade, domestic, transportation, shipping manifest. I have to say one of the limitations of the Georgetown Slavery Archive is that there's an inconsistency in the way subjects are used, and they also, and this does not have tags, but I can show you. If we go back here to this one, you could see that there should be tags. Oh, they did tag. Oh, it's at the bottom. I'm sorry. Right here. They do tag things, but if you click here, slave sale, 8 documents come up. And I know that there are many, many more documents related to sales on the Georgetown Slavery Archive. It's not just the 1838 sale that is documented on this. The Jesuits engaged in the slave trade. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 73. That's actually more like it. Sorry, that's my mistake, my bad. But essentially, there is inconsistency in the way that's presented. The best way to discover names on the Georgetown Slavery Archive is to use the search bars. The platform that they use, Ameka, returns entries exactly the way they're written in all fields of each entry. You have to note that each document, sometimes the descriptions of the document humanizes the subjects of the document. So sometimes the person is referred to in the description in a different way than they would be referred to in the transcript. For instance, and I'm going to show you the name, it's a very common name, Bibiana. Sometimes you'll see people write in the description it's Bibiana, and in the transcript it's going to be Bib or Bibi. And there's variations that are really important that are important to consider when you use this. It also the search bar also cuts across time periods and places. And the other thing too, and you're going to see this in a second, why I say this, is that it might be helpful for you to download the material as a PDF. If for instance, you see a document, and let's start with Bibiana. Here, you're going to see that it comes up with 4 documents, right? This is a census of Newtown. And again, this is from an external source that shows the names of the people that appear in the transcript. Okay. And Bibiana is one of those names. The problem is, if you're like me, you're probably searching it. It is there. It's in the middle. She's listed as a 14-year-old. If you're like me, you're looking at this and you're wondering how and why. And if you download this as a PDF and then search within the PDF, it'll highlight it for you. So if you get stuck that way, that's the way I would work around that. But anyway, that's one result you can get. The other problem is that there's a lot of variations of that name. So Bibi is one. And you'll see that comes up. That's how she's listed in the manifest of the Katherine Jackson. And you could see here, she's listed right up top, Bibby, and there's a an apostrophe, a quotation mark underneath that's really a ditto sign in 19th century works, and so she's a butler. If you were to go ahead, let's say, and she's a butler, and you wanted to go ahead and refine it a bit and say Bibby Butler, that document is going to turn up, but basically because there's other butlers in it. Okay. So that's something that you have to consider, is that often people aren't listed with their full surnames, and you're going to get in this case, you're going to get all the butlers. Okay. So it's kind of clunky that way. The other thing too about this search engine is that one way, and for those of you who are familiar with library systems, you may be used to the fact that you can go ahead and use an asterisk, and it would return everything with Bibby, Bibiana, Bib, all that would come up. Nothing. In this case, there's nobody with the BIB, and it does not turn up anybody has a Bibiana, Bibi. Okay. So that's a big limitation of the Georgetown Slavery Archive. But nonetheless, if you're looking for names of people in the financial records, this is a great place to do it because it's searchable. As flawed as it is, it's an amazing resource for people who are doing this work. Finally, there is an advanced search on the Georgetown Slavery Archive, and this is actually a new feature. We just added this. So, I'm still playing around with it to see how this works, but you can search for keywords. Just to go back to Bibiana, and in this case, Butler, see what comes up. In this case, let's see. Oh, nothing comes up because it's basically the search bar here restricts it. Okay, so if you went Bibiana Butler here, it actually comes up, and there's nothing comes up because it doesn't find Bibiana Butler as a phrase. But if you do it in the general search bar, you're going to get Bibiana and all the butlers. So that's an interesting feature of it. Right here, you can get pretty much what came up before, but also too, if you want Bibiana Sal, it comes up with that and a couple more documents for you that relates to the sale. But again, it's restrictive. It's not, it narrows it down instead of expanding it. The other thing too about this is that if you wanted to you search a specific topic, like for instance, sales, you can go within collection. So for instance, if you wanted to look at the sales within, how that comes up in Georgetown College, you can go to this bar collection and then essentially find 19 items that relate to sales at Georgetown College, and you can go through those individually if you'd like. The other feature of this too that's helpful is that essentially you can search by tags if you wanted to. Hold on a second. Oh, I'm sorry. You can search by tags by guessing the tag that you want, but the easiest thing to do is to go here and just go through this, and the tags are listed in alphabetical order. So for instance, if you're interested in a specific person, like, Elizabeth Queen, she's tagged, and the one document that relates to her, and she's part of a will of one of the Jesuits, John Ashton, you can go ahead and find her there. So finally, the last thing I'm going to say about the Georgetown Slavery Archive is that it's really important, just in general, to get a strong sense of chronology. And the Georgetown Slavery Archive, actually, if you're beginning this introducing yourself for the first time, it is good at providing chronology. And the one thing you can do and I do this actually more often than I can tell you, is I go through this list of documents, and this is all the documents on the Georgetown Slavery Archive listed by the date that it was created. So the earliest document we have listed here is something on 1715. Okay. And it's a list of people that were owned by James Carroll, and it includes some of the people that were part of White Marsh that became part of the Jesuit slave holdings. Finally, the other thing too is that there's this timeline that was created by a student named Alana Hendy. And this is actually really, I think, useful for people, especially if they're trying to get into researching Louisiana, because there was a lot of work done trying to trace what happened to the people once they were sold. So you can go here to dates 1853, and you could see here that the Jesuit enslaved community had the people who were sold initially to Jesse Beatty were sold again as part of his estate, and you could go directly to the document that's related to that. So there's this timeline I think is really useful for people when they're just starting to do this work. All right, now I'm going to get into what I consider at least the heart of what my work has been, is really to discuss the Jesuit houses and their records. The records of the Jesuit houses is approximately 30% of the Maryland Province Archives. And the term house is interchangeable with the word station or community. Okay, I just was about to swear. Anyway, I shouldn't have swear. This has been recording. But anyway, it's and and basically from the seat of each house, the Jesuits traveled to their missions, whether it was sick calls or schools or other activities, and also conferring sacraments unto people. That's essentially how they worked. Between 2020 and 2023, the booth staff digitized all materials in the Maryland Province Archives that were dated before 1900. And since that time, we have added materials dated between 1900 and 1940 that are important for reconciliation efforts. So if any of you know things that are between those dates that you think are really important to share with the community that haven't been digitized yet, please just drop me a note and we can make sure that gets done. The records of the houses consist of records of the pastoral activities of each house, and they're distinct from records of the plantation, so that even though these houses, St. Inigo's, Newtown, St. Thomas Manor, White Marsh, were pastoral centers and had plantations, the records of houses were really supposed to be just the pastoral activities. Anyway, so and the other thing too is that Georgetown received these records from disparate sources, so that for most of the houses the records are rather fragmentary. It's not as if there's going to be sacramental registers from the founding of the house in 1763 or 1663 to the time it closed in 1964 or something like that. You're just not going to get that with this. It's very, very idiosyncratic. And just to give you an idea what this looks like, this is what the records of the houses look like in the finding aid. And this is essentially what the scope and content looks like for the introduction for the records of the houses. And you can see here each house is listed separately, and essentially that's the basic organizing concept. Let's see, they are dated between 1800 and 1940. There were numerous fires that affected essentially what we have. The principal medium of these are diaries, announcement books, financial records, The financial records included donor records and pew rent records and sacramental registers. I know that many of you are very familiar with sacramental registers if you've been doing any of this genealogy at all, but I'm going to explain a bit what the diaries, announcement books, and financial records are. So mostly because they can be overlooked. The other thing too about the house records is that individual priests often maintain their own records. So some are included in the house series and some are included in individual priest collections. So, and essentially each house is a sub-series, and with the exception of those on the Eastern Shore and Washington, D.C., each house has its own sub-series, and that is essentially St. Inigo's would be paired with Ridge, which is the succeeding house. Each scope and content note includes the list of churches that and the dates that were served by the Jesuits and notes about transfer from the Jesuits to the Archdiocese. Almost all of the Jesuit houses in Southern Maryland are no longer operated by the Jesuits. The only exception is St. Thomas Manor, and even then, you wouldn't necessarily consider that a house. But the Jesuits withdrew from their pastoral work in the 1960s. And essentially each scope and each of the folders are organized by essentially whether it's a diary, announcement book, or the like. So let's see right here, because I just had this out, and I have to admit I'm probably not as well organized as I should be. But you can see here what I mean by the individual series. The Alexandria, Georgetown, and Washington are together, mostly because there's just such blending between the houses. Sometimes it's organized by Washington and centered in Gonzaga. Sometimes it's centered at Georgetown College. It's very confusing. Bohemia and St. Joseph's Church is also relatively confusing because the priests often shared resources. But here is where you can see the Southern Maryland, White Marsh and Bowie, La Plata, St. Thomas Manor, Chaptico, Great Mills, and Great Mills was founded later, Newtown and Leonardtown, St. Inigo's and Ridge. And you can go here to St. Inigo's and Ridge, and you can see here in this scope and content note in the description a brief history of what the St. Inigo's house was like, but also here what the individual churches were. St. Ignatius Church was the seat of it, and it operated up until 1946 when the Jesuits transferred that property to the U.S. Navy. St. Michael's Church was operated until 1963, and at that point, the Archdiocese took over that parish. There is a Black parish, St. Peter's Clavers in Ridge. That's also important to consider. It's the only predominantly African American parish in St. Mary's County, and that's split off from St. Michael's in 1902. So the individual churches are listed there, and you can also go through here and you can see that you've got announcement books. Announcement books are the announcements that were made at Mass. They were often fairly standard for the community. Diaries are the individual activities of the priests. It was recorded by, it was called the minister of each house, but somebody basically made a record of visits to houses, visits to individual plantations, and those records are here. And you can see for St. Inigo's, it's not a bad set, 1839 to 1881, 1843 to 44. But they're actually really informative about the community, and they're great sources if you want to understand more about the social segregation within parishes, not to mention that they do mention individuals occasionally. Finally, you could scroll through here and you could see that there's some publications, photographs, but there's also financial ledgers, and here with sacramental registers. But if you scroll further, you can see if the records refer to an individual church or body of records for an individual church, you can see here that it's listed here separately. And it's listed by the name of the church. If something is an announcement book, it refers to everywhere that's served by the house. So even if you think you're only interested in, St. Michael's and Ridge, for instance, you might find it worthwhile to look at the announcement books for the whole house or the diaries or the financial records as well. Um, I'm trying to, and basically, you can go here and take a look at the diary. And essentially, this is a really important diary by Livy Vigilante. He was the priest that worked after the Civil War at St. Inigo's. But you can go here, and it takes a minute for it to load up. And you get pretty much the descriptive information. This is the digital repository for Georgetown. You can scroll through it here, you can enlarge it here, but basically, this essentially is the entire volume. You do have to deal with his handwriting, which is rather difficult. And I also find the easiest way to deal with this is to look at these is to download it. And there's an icon there, and you just hit it, it says save, and you can and essentially it will download to your computer, and that's usually the easiest way to take a look at things. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I needed to say. But that's more or less what I wanted to point out. The other important thing about the houses is that once this, especially after the Civil War, there's a reorganization of the houses, and once industry begins to take over, they move the seat of the house, and they move the rectory of the house to a more urban area. That's why White Marsh is succeeded by Bowie, St. Inigo's is succeeded by Ridge, Newtown is succeeded by Leonardtown. And in those cases, we've organized a sub-series within that discrete group. So just to give you an idea what these are like, the house diaries can often contain information about individuals. In this case, there's an excerpt on the last rites given to a person named Elizabeth Chase, who's identified by Livy Vigilante as a colored woman, as you could tell by the abbreviation COL. She received the rites of the church and was quite willing to depart from this world. She, 2 or 3 weeks before, walked to the church fasting while it was raining, went to confession and communion, and returned home 2 miles under constant rain. Now, certainly the piety piety is always a valued attribute and something that they really value. And I think it would be really interesting for somebody to do kind of a language study into the ways that the Jesuits referred to somebody that they thought was pious and basically what I would call a good Negro. I lost again. Okay, announcement books can often contain, as you might expect if you still go, if for those of you who go to church, announcements about community events, things like fairs, which were often separated by race. But here's a specific one, a word of thanks to colored men who cleaned the graveyard, and then quote unquote comment on attendance at mass. So it was often used at these and the announcements to basically congratulate, but mostly to scold the people for not attending mass. So essentially, that's something you see in the announcement books. And finally, the thing that I think most of you are most interested in is the church records and registers. It's important to remember that individual parishes are the primary principal repositories of sacramental records. And after an individual parish closes, the Archdiocesan Archives takes the records. And what I should say is that what I think many of you may be familiar with is that a lot of parishes are combining. In those cases, the records of the merging parishes are retained within the active parish. So, for instance, St. Aloysius Church that closed down in Washington, D.C., the records are part of Holy Redeemer. So it's not often that you're going to find the Archdiocesan Archives taking them. House records include missions that were never recognized as churches by the Archdiocese. And for White Marsh especially, there's a number of missions that are included in our sacramental registers that never became churches. And some of them are centered in plantations. The house ministers are the primary creators, but in some cases, these records includes things that were created by individual priests. So they were the individual priest records. They may have been transferred to some other church records. I don't really know. We're not able to trace that. And there are church records within these records. In some cases, they're mistakenly kept with the house registers. And those are a case of kind of records leakage. And for those of you who may recall the 2016 campaign where Hillary Clinton's emails became an issue, that's a great example of records leakage where somebody had copies of records that may have been official records. At least that's part of my assumption of what was going on. But for relative to the amount of church records that Southern Maryland has as a whole, the records we have are relatively insubstantial. The churches really maintain most of these records. But for people who are descended from the GU 272, these are highly consequential. And we have a genre form that we created, church records and registers, that helps people get through some of the issues of organization with these. The way you can get at this is you can essentially search church records and registers up back at the main page, the Georgetown University archival resources, or you can search within any of the collections for these. The most efficient way of doing it is going back to this portal, going church records. And that should give you the 46 results, okay? It includes Holy Trinity Church, which I'll talk a little bit about near the end of this, White Marsh, individual folders. And you'll also see, if you scroll down long enough, you'll see that we have records that are parts of, I know it's down here. Most of these are from the Maryland Province Archives, but I know there's individual priest collections. You see right here, you can see the source information. And essentially, you may just have to trust me, but it's there. I know it's there. I saw it. No. And anyway, this essentially, you can go through these if you want to go through individually. And I know that there's sacramental registers that are part of Abraham Emmerich's collections, as well as some of the other individual priests. So, okay. This is a listing, and I'm going to give everybody the slideshow. This is a listing of the sacramental registers that we have within the House series of the Maryland Province Archives. I did not include in this list some of the records that were created by individual priests. They're generally less substantial, but there are other ways of getting at them. This is what a baptismal record would look like, and essentially in many cases you're going to learn more about the enslavers than you are about the person who is being baptized. In Joseph Mosley, who was the missionary who went out to the Eastern Shore and founded St. Joseph's Church, he did maintain a register, and he often wrote more about, like I said, more about the enslaver. In 1760, on September 4th, he noted that Clement, a Negro of Joseph Jenkins, was baptized, and he lists as his godparents Joseph Jenkins. So in this case, the godparents were not people within the community of the enslaved. If you go to the 19th century, in most cases, you're going to find, not all, but in most cases, you're going to find that the godparents are from the community of enslaved and free Black people. And there's more information, too, about the parents. So in this case, the baptism of Noble Moses Taylor is in White Marsh, and he was baptized on 11 November of 1832. He is the son of Joseph Evans and Leasa Dorsey, servants at White Marsh, whom we happen to know were part of the Sal. Leasa and Joseph Evans remained in Maryland, while Noble, their very young child at the 1838 sale was trafficked to Louisiana, and his godmother was Polly Quinn. Marriage records also were really important. Generally speaking, the Jesuits gave enslaved people the rights of marriage, even though there was no legal recognition of marriage among enslaved people. Um, the Jesuits did perform this sacrament, but they always performed it with the consent of the enslavers. So here you can see in 1798, Joseph Mosley again is recording the marriage of enslaved people, an enslaved man by note at St. Joseph Peregrine Thomas, Negro man Tom to our Henny. Our Henny refers to somebody owned by the Jesuits, daughter of Jenny, Sam Tilley, and others. Finally, there's a dispensation. A dispensation basically refers to the fact that the sacrament is given by permission. And for enslaved people, there was always a dispensation involved. And in this case, they married Henry, who was colored, having no prejudices, meaning that they don't know of any previous marriages, but he belongs to a Catholic named Jonathan B. Long, to a free woman named named Harriet Butler. And the witnesses are two people that appear to be within their family community. So finally, and the other types of records you're going to see are burial records, and we actually have quite a lot of these for Holy Trinity Catholic Church, but we also have good records for several of the other houses, White Marsh too. But here you can see Joseph Mosley again is making a record saying that they buried Jenny Ann and four children who are unnamed at Corsica, which is a plantation of Charles Blake. And then finally, there's another entry in Newtown in 1819 that they buried Jane, about 3 years old, a property of Lewis Booth and the lawful daughter of Susanna, who belongs to Booth and George, the property of Philip Ford. And he died on the 25th of that month. Okay, questions? Share. I'm recording. Okay. The other area too that, and I don't know if you noticed it, but you can there's a number of financial records that are part of the house records that include day books, expense and receipt journals, account books, some records books. A lot of these have mixed in with them records of pew rents, and again, for a lot of you who've done this research before, you understand what pew rents are, that really until about World War II, the Catholic Church had a practice like numerous other churches, religious organizations do, where they rented out pews to individual families for a fee. And Black parishioners also participated in this. There are donor books and sometimes graveyard records, not necessarily the burial records, but the amounts of money that were transferred over. And some of these are part of the procurator records. And just to give you an idea of what this looks like, right here you could see it's described as a pew rent book for white and Black parishioners, and you can see that there's individual accounts and arrangement of pews that are part of this. But the bigger thing is, again, and just for navigation, you can see I go click here, Archives of the Maryland Province of the Society of Jesus, go back up, and I can search pew. Actually, pew is probably a better term just because it's more global. And you could see the variety of places that pew rents show up. In this case, it's part of the records of the procurator in subject files. So by that I mean you go here, it's a book of pew rents, St. Joseph's, and you look here. And essentially what this is that when we arranged this collection and we undertook this project, we went through a major rearrangement of the Maryland Province Archives. And part of it was we were trying to rationalize things by function. And as much as the records suggested that, we kept that. But in some cases, we found that things that might have been pastoral were included in folders that were financial. So in this case, you're going to see a book of pew rents is actually part of subject files. That essentially is part of, just to go back. Oops, let's go back to here. You could see right here, the subject files are part of the procurator, and you could scroll through here and you could see all the subjects. And the subjects basically conform to, in most cases, they conform to exact places that I was referring to. We made sure that the subjects, mirrored the house subseries as much as we could. And actually the record suggested that things were kept that way. And financial records and these subject files included records related to deeds, property records, and things like that. So they're good records to know about, but that's where you're just going to find that that's a bit disorganized. And I'm sorry, but that's the case. But what we have done is we've made sure that when we know that pew rents are within a folder, that it's part of the description, so it's discoverable when you do that search. Finally, a special case is the records of St. Alphonsus Church. St. Alphonsus was the church that was served by the Jesuits from Woodstock College, and Woodstock College was really a place for the seminarians, the people who is not merely meant for novices. Novices are the first 2 years of Jesuit formation. These are for people who were more advanced. They were called technically scholasticates, who basically did the rest of their education at Woodstock College. And Woodstock College is located in, for those of you who know in Maryland, it's northern Howard County near Baltimore. And you can basically, these records include just it really shows the vibrancy of parish life. Many of the people who were part of this parish had connections to basically some of the people who were descended from the Jews 272 themselves, the first generation or two, who were still linked to St. Inigo's or Newtown. They all had relationships to people in St. Alphonsus Church. And I also should say, too, many of these families had relationships to people who moved on to Baltimore and Philadelphia as well. But right here, you can see that essentially this is what this looks like. It's part of the Woodstock College archives, which I'll get back to in a second. But you can see there's a discrete set of folders called St. Alphonsus Church, and they describe St. Peter Claver, and this, essentially are records of this Black congregation. If you go here to the actual record, you could see a bit of what they were dealing, what they're trying to, what these look like. It's going to take forever. And that photograph that's part of the illustration comes directly out of this. So you can see there's an actual diary, lists of names of people who attended the Sunday school, but also, and this is a photograph of the school. So there's a lot of interesting things about their activity, but it's also a great source of genealogical information. But the other thing about this that I think is really important is that the archivist for this, Adrian Bognes, worked with a volunteer, somebody who worked with him. It was 4 or 5 days a week during the summer, where they created indices of these records. And essentially, they created an indice with people listed by surname, given name, and with each entry is the date of where they appear in it. So going back here, again, I'm doing this very inefficiently. Let's go back here where you've got a sense of what this is like. But you could see here, you can go into the scope and content note. You could go to the additional description, and you can see the individual people are listed, and it's by their date. And you could see there one common name is Barnes, Bennett, and I would think there's Butlers, many of the names that are associated with the sale, Dorsey. And you can essentially go through this and they're listed in alphabetical order. The other thing too that you can do that's extremely convenient is you can search the collection. You can go back to the collection page and you can search the collection for Bennett, and you can search discrete names if you want to. Well, let's go Charles. I think there's a Charles Bennett. And essentially it gives you the names of, actually it's coming up with a lot. Here it is, St. Alphonsus Church. You've got to look for that. But it'll give you the name, and essentially you've got to go through this index again to find it. The only glitch in doing this and where it takes patience is that the records themselves can be difficult to figure out what date you're looking at. But they are listed by date, but it's a really important resource. And again, going back to this question about Frederick, a lot of I suspect that many of the people who were at part of St. Alphonsus also were part of the whole Frederick community as well. So all of that's important. Finally, I've been talking about the archives of the Maryland province of the Society of Jesus, and I talked in general about the organization of it. But one of the important things to consider is that I showed you the subject files, but it is important to get a sense of chronology, because if you're going to do this really thoroughly, you really do need to be able to look at some records that are organized in chronological fashion. And one of the areas that I think is important, especially, is we've got this series that's called Series 1.1, and it's basically a listing of materials that essentially the Jesuits dealt with, things related to missions, membership, rules, treatment of people, treatment of enslaved people, and certainly the 1838 sale. So if you scroll down here, you'll find some of the correspondence. And I know, for instance, that Melisande Short-Colomb has found really important information about in one of these letters about the immediate aftermath of the sale, and where they discuss who went where and why. Isaac Hawkins, for instance, who's listed as the first person involved in the sale, those letters indicate that he in fact remained with the Jesuits because of his age. Holy Trinity Church Archives we have all the sacramental registers digitized, and those are not indexed very well. I mean, they may be part of our other holdings, but most of these registers have a name register in the beginning of them, so you're not lost. And there are plenty of people who have connections to the plantations who are part of Holy Trinity Catholic Church. And then finally, and these are pages that I compiled, and it's called Slavery, Memory, Reconciliation Library Resources. And loosely speaking, these are all the materials that I say the library sources were used for. And kind of what it mostly is it's my own directory to the materials that relate to slavery, memory, reconciliation. If I'm going to be completely honest, so, it has here SMR Initiative About, which has, the official Georgetown sites, like, the websites and the statements by the university president, the timeline, which refers to, all of the events that have led to the formation of the Descendants Foundations and basically impacted the initiative as a whole. But the important ones that I want to point out to you is that there's here a section on digital scholarship. And for those of you who are interested in names, and maybe I let you sit through this whole presentation without bringing this up, but I did. There was a digital project called Life and Labor Under Slavery, the Jesuit Plantation Project. And one of the things that the investigator did, she was really trying to create, develop a sense of, who the connections were among the people enslaved by the Jesuits. So she went through all of the pre-1838 records, not the pre-1864 records, but pre-1838 records. and recorded the names of individual Jesuits, but also people who were enslaved. And you can see a number of them do not have surnames, but if you're really trying to do a search of people, she's listed all of them. The biggest limitation with this is that the citations she's developed, and she has these things, essentially it's abbreviated and you could figure out what those are. The problem is that you would there it's from the old finding aid that we developed, and I would need to work with you on terms of making a bridge to our records. It can be done. It would require some patience, but for people who are really truly interested in digging into this, it is a good resource. And finally, the other thing too about these pages is that I did include a page for descendants, and for many of you, you know more about these associations than I do, and also too, you know that I need to update this. If you just take a look at glass, I did not. At first glance, I did not. I have not updated Descendants United, so please excuse me. But the documentation projects are listed here as well. So for people beginning, that's an important place to start. So finally, and I gave this away in the question and answer, but I will be sending you all a table that I've developed. Essentially, you can get at all this information through the finding aid in that, you know, in the finding aid, you can search through a church that you're interested in, and if it's within the sacramental registers and it's documented within the sacramental registers, the discrete register will come up in the search. So will the subseries come up in the search. So that will give you an idea of what's covered within each subseries and what's covered within each discrete folder. But the most important thing too is that you need to be aware of what the relationship between those records are and to move outwards. So I've developed a table that I use all the time, and I'm hoping it's accurate at this point. And if you see things that are mistaken, please let me know. But I will definitely share it with you. It includes a listing of the churches that the Jesuits served at each station. I've tried to identify the churches that were predominantly Black membership. Then most all of those were formed after 1900. And I've also tried to make sure that you understand which archdiocese it's connected to. So essentially, that's something I will send to all of you with the slideshow. And I'll also be sending all of you an evaluation form because I am interested in trying to do other sessions, perhaps with one of the archdiocesan archivists to discuss church records. Irving, I know that you're interested in land records, so maybe I'll do something with the Maryland State Archives. So all these things are ideas. So I want to get your ideas as, first of all, your thoughts on as to how helpful this has been, but also to what things we can do to follow up. So, and every single one of you is welcome to visit the Booth Family Center for Special Collections or to contact me individually for a consultation. So with that, I'm going to stop recording.